Hey, what's going on everyone? In this video, we'll be looking at the premium Bandai exclusive, RE100 Shokew, from the 1993 anime series Victory Gundam. Yeah, it's Shokew apparently. Not exactly the pronunciation you'd expect, but, you know, it's Gundam. You kinda just get used to names not making sense. Well anyway, you know just how much I love these strange mobile suits, especially when they come from such an underrated series like Victory Gundam. This is just such a unique design, looking more out of a Kamen Rider series than a Gundam, so I've always been curious how it'd be brought into Gunpla form. And here it is. Now as always, we'll be taking a look at this kit in 4 categories: the build, appearance, articulation, and the gimmicks. Hopefully this review can help you decide if you're down for the inevitable crazy resale prices a premium Bandai kit like this often ends up with. Alright, now let's jump right into that build. Being an RE100, this build really feels like a sized up high grade. I know I say that every time, but I really mean it here. You put this Shokew in 1/144th scale and no one would really know the difference. It has about the same number of bad nubs as a standard high grade, and the occasional bad seam line crops up here and there. But generally speaking, it's a really simple build with no real glaring flaws. What inner frame is here is extremely bare bones, with much of this engineering being stuff you've probably seen 100 times before. For example, the arms are the usual sandwiching of plastic pieces that most builders can knock out blindfolded. It even has that old school nub on the front. I'm sure both experienced Gunpla fans and newer Gunpla fans would have zero issue snap building this guy together. However, the uniqueness of this suit's design still leads to some interesting engineering. These shoulders specifically actually had me confused for a second. See, unlike most mobile suits, each side is unique, meaning you can't just space out while building them. The right side even has a pop-out gimmick to mix things up. I also found the legs to be really engaging. Starting with the feet, they connect to this leg via a horizontal ball joint which is connected to a hinge inside the foot. The front navy section is also on a separate swivel, allowing it to move up and down depending on the pose. All around, just strange stuff going on here. Moving up the leg, we have the usual armor sandwich holding the pieces together. But for some reason, the ankle is held in place via the back of the leg. This allows for the entire front leg armor to be a single piece, meaning it's really easy to pop off and hit up these painting locations underneath. The beam sabers then store on the upper thigh, with a dedicated piece to slide them into. Lastly, you'll notice the side skirts are actually connected to the top of the hip rather than the waist section. Overall, this suit's unique design allows for some really interesting, albeit very simple, engineering. Onto the painting locations, there really isn't a whole lot of extra work needed on your part. With this suit being mainly yellow and navy blue, it's not too difficult to get them looking good. The only mandatory painting needed is on these antennae. The top of them is supposed to be red, and Bandai does provide a set of stickers for them. However, they're gonna have to wrap around these small antennae, so you just know they're gonna pop up in no time. Instead, I just hit them with a red Gundam marker. It's not quite as vibrant as I'd like, no doubt because I painted over a darker surface, but I think it'll be more durable than those stickers. I will make a note though, that in the anime, these antennae often don't have this red section. Of course, given Victory Gundam's more simplified animation, looking for anime accuracy in these small details is basically impossible. So there's a legitimate case for just keeping these antennas stock. Aside from that, there really isn't much optional detailing I can find. Sure, you could add some black to this exposed inner frame on the ankles, which I did do here, but the navy blue is already so dark that I'm not really seeing much of a difference here. Same goes for these vents around the neck, these sections on the side of the chest, and on the bottom of the feet. They're all extremely easy to paint, due to either the armor just popping off or them being separate pieces. But again, you could really get away with just leaving them stock. You might also like to paint up these pipes in the chest, as they're part of a separate piece, but I kind of like them to blend into this inner frame color, so I didn't paint them. I will say, I added a ton of gray inside the pop-out gimmick in the shoulder. Yeah, the inside is just the other side of this yellow piece. It looked so bad, I had to paint it right out of the box. Of course, if you don't plan to use this pop-out feature, then this will never be visible, so you can probably just skip over it in that case. Other than that, you can really just hit these panel lines with some black ink and have a pretty amazing looking Shokew. Speaking of this Shokew looking amazing, let's take a look over this kit's appearance. Starting with the most striking aspect of this kit, we have this beautiful yellowish orange base color. Yeah, it just looks fantastic, being the perfect blend of bright yellow and a warm orange or red. I'll admit it's a little brighter and maybe more saturated than it is in the anime series, but not so much that it's noticeable on its own. This lighter blend is still very nice, helping them to really stand out on your shelf, but still maintaining that uniqueness that fans like me are looking for. I'm also a huge fan of this navy blue. It's dark enough to serve as the inner frame color, but it still has enough blue in there to make it pop. Honestly, there's not a lot of reason to paint this inner frame, as even when it pops through the armor, it's dark enough to pass for pure black anyways. Lastly, we have what little red is found on this kit. It's really just the head and waist section. Thankfully, this red is kept dull enough that it acts more like the highlight it's supposed to be, rather than stealing your attention away from this great orange-yellow base color. All in all, the colors are one of the real selling features of this kit, and Bandai seems to have nailed that aspect. The proportions, on the other hand, aren't exactly right. He looks extremely slimmed up and modernized, almost to the point of looking like a man in a suit rather than a machine. But you know, I'm kinda into it. Really, I don't say this too often, but this design really works well when modernized. It's just something about the sloping curves and sharp edges that look really great when slimmed up. The legs are super long here, but they really don't look out of place. The chest and head have also been shrunk slightly to appeal to more modern standards, but they still blend in very well with the rest of this suit. That doesn't mean Bandai threw out all that cheap anime wonkiness though. The feet here are huge, straight out of a 90s Gunpla. Also, the shoulders are still massive on this kit. They're a real defining feature of this silhouette for me, so I like that Bandai didn't shrink them too much here. So I'm sure this is kind of weird for some people to hear me say, and don't get me wrong, I would have loved a more anime accurate take on this suit. But also, I can't say I'm too disappointed here. Everything just blends together very well. Rounding out this appearance, this kit does come with peel and stick decals. Of course, I only used a single model number for the chest, just to add some character. But if you wanted to add in those caution signs, they're all here for you. It does omit the usual faction logos though. I'm a little disappointed there, as this Bespa logo would have looked really great on this kit's shoulder. Regardless of how much you decide to decal this guy up though, he's gonna look great in just about every pose you put him in. And with that, let's see what kind of poses you get out of this kit. As always, let's start with these feet. And I guess the ankles too, considering they're kinda one component here. First up, you can move the toes up and down independently for some reason. These are just really bizarre. Next up, he has a ball joint and a hinge inside the foot itself. While it doesn't give you too much articulation, you can unhinge it outward for a bit more mobility. All around one of the strangest feet I've built recently. But yeah, while these feet and ankles are really interesting, they unfortunately are also this kit's most glaring flaw. See, despite this interesting engineering, it can be very difficult to get him into a good grounded pose. Having said that, this kit really shines on an action base. So much so, I'd say it's basically a requirement with this kit. He comes with a dedicated attachment piece as well, which keeps him in place surprisingly well too. Back to these joints though, we get a very solid 180-degree bend from this knee. It actually feels like it wants to go further too. Just great stuff here. The hips seem strange at first, with their unique side skirt setup, but they're basically the same swivels we see on most modern master grades. All said and done, you get some decent twist, some really crazy kicks, and the average splits. These hips do have a nice swing forward to them from a mechanism inside the waist. I really haven't found much use for it though, maybe in some real dynamic aerial pose or something. Moving on up to the chest, we only have a single ball joint at the waist, allowing for some great spins. This is followed by a nice tilt on top for some decent ab crunches. Onto the arms, we have a great pop out from the shoulder's inner frame. I'm getting some real master grade vibes here. Other than that, you get the usual spins and lateral movement. Working our way down the arm, we have a 360-degree spin on top and about a 135-degree bend from the elbow. Real classic stuff here. You get 3 sets of fingers with this kit, 1 for the rifle and 2 for the beam sabers. They're not the best hands, often falling out, but they get the job done. Apparently, these hands are supposed to work with the Master Grade Victory Gundam as well. I really haven't tested it, but it means you might be able to swap out some weapons here and there. Lastly, we have this head. It's the usual ball joint on a hinge, allowing for my favorite chest up, head down Katoki poses. And that should be all these joints. It feels like I'm skipping a few, but that's really it. It's a pretty regular gunpla by modern standards. I will say the feet and ankles can be seriously frustrating though, but once you get this guy onto an action base, it's hardly an issue. Lastly, let's take a look over these gimmicks. First up, we have the token beam rifle. It's entirely gray, so not the most interesting rifle, but it does have a cool pop-up scope. He can hold the rifle relatively well, but it's not quite as solid as I'd like. The rifle's handle is just a little too big for this hand. Still, he can hit all the usual poses here. They just take a little bit of effort to get to. Next up, I'd love to say he comes with that sick Gatling gun he used in the anime, but unfortunately, you need to pick up the Master Grade V-pack if you want it. I'm a little disappointed there, but it's not really a deal breaker for me. Moving on, we now have the usual beam sabers. I really like the look of these sabers, with this yellowish green really popping, even in comparison to this unique base color. Unlike the rifle, he can hold both sabers just fine, as the handles aren't quite as demanding on the fingers. He also comes with 2 additional handles for storing on the back of the leg. You'd think they'd fall out all the time, but thanks to a small peg inside the slot, they stay in place pretty firmly. Now let's get to the most interesting gimmick on this kit, this beam rotor. It's this huge piece of transparent plastic. In the anime, this is used to aid in flight, and it looks just as wacky as you'd expect in model kit form. This piece also has a cool 3D texture to it that reflects light very well. I'm sure this video isn't exactly doing it justice, especially because I use polarizers in these videos, but there's a real nice reflective texture here that when put in the right light really sparkles. Of course, it's a pretty big piece, so naturally it hampers his arm movement quite a bit when on the ground. However, you can always put him into his helicopter pose on an action base to get it up and out of the way. Moving on to the gimmicks found in the suit itself, we have that pop-out shoulder section I mentioned in the build. On the right shoulder, you can slide out and unfold this top section to reveal his twin shoulder beam gun. It's not quite as impressive as it sounds though, being this little gray gun on a hinge. It also doesn't have any effect pieces, so it just looks a little pathetic in my opinion. Still, it functions just as it does in the anime, so I can't complain here. And finally, we can swap out his eyes for this red piece with a cool scanning effect on it. It looks really nice, especially if you drop some black ink into these nice deep channels. You can swap out these eyes by simply opening up the head and popping in the new piece. Easy as that. While I personally wouldn't display him like this, as I prefer a more normal look, I could see this really amping up some action poses. And that should about do it for these gimmicks. It's really just the basics here, but the beam rotor is every bit the strange selling feature it's supposed to be. Plus, supposedly these hands are the same size as the Victory Gundam Master Grades, so I'm sure if you wanted to give this guy more weapons, like that sick Gatling gun for one, you just need to pick up that V-pack set. Alright, now it's time to wrap all this up here. The build was very solid, mainly being a sized up high grade. Still, there are quite a few interesting sections here, specifically in the legs. The appearance is definitely a bit modernized up, but personally, I think it meshes very well with this suit's design. The articulation is where he starts running into some issues. As cool as these feet are, they really hinder his ground poses. This is one of those kits you're gonna need an action base for. And finally, he has all the usual gimmicks, including one of the coolest effect pieces I've seen with this beam rotor. All said and done, I really enjoyed this RE100 Shokew. Sure, I would have preferred a legitimate master grade with its crazy inner frame, improved articulation, all that. But at the same time, I can't be too down on this fun little kit. This RE100 Shokew is both a great kit for Victory Gundam fans and new fans alike. so naturally, it's highly recommended. And that should about do it here. If you have any questions about this kit, feel free to ask them in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where I post updates, work in progress builds, the whole deal. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.